I hesitate to call us regenerative ag. I'll just tell you what we do. You can decide if we're regenerative ag or not. But we're all 1,100 acres is sandhills grass. We need to graze 8 to 10 months a year. We in the winter, December, January, sometimes February, we feed alfalfa hay in order to maintain our certification with the American Grass-Fed Association. But to get 8 to 10 months of grazing in the sandhills, which is north here on Road 23, most of it, a little bit in Washington County. We've cross-fenced, so I guess there are a lot of catchphrases for what we do, but we just say we're managed grazing. And our object is we really have two primary goals, and they're not really related to beef production at all. We want drought resilience, so we want to have 2 to 3 years. We want to be able to survive 2 to 3 years of drought. Now I can tell you, we just came through 2 years and we really didn't make it. It was real discouraging. So we've done a little bit of reducing our head count so that we can get back, and we probably need 2 or 3 years just to get back where we should be. Over the last 10 years we've suffered, and I think this is the last 10, I think this is every 10 years going back on the high plains. We suffer 3 years of drought. We suffer 1 year of above average, and that happened to be 25 inches. And the other years are all normal to drier than normal. Rarely we have a normal year. It's always drier. We can survive on 14 inches pretty well with what we do, but the last 2 years we've been down to 10 inches, and it's really tested our carrying capacity. So we want to manage for drought resilience, and we want to manage for diversity. And that means we want to see all of the major grass species that are typical of the sandhills in this area. And we're highly dependent on we're dependent on all the grasses, but the warm season grasses are really what carry us through. And we can probably talk about those species later on, but that's, we're all direct sales. The internet has been a great tool for us. Keith lives in Brighton. We actually have our freezer there, so we do internet sales, direct pickup, lots of quarter and half beef, and that's how we do our marketing. I think that's enough as an introduction, and I think that especially when Byron gets going on the grazing side, we'll have some good questions coming, and I think to mix it up we should go to Curtis because he's primarily a dry farmer.
Well, last year dry was the critical word. We were dry farmers, and maybe dry and the farming part was a little bit, I was wondering if I was farmer. But anyway, I don't know how far back to go. I've been continuous crop no-till since 1997. I sold my tillage equipment then. I don't know, those of you that might have been sensitive at that time, there was a push. Monsanto had the main event, and Dwayne Beck was down, and different things, and my wife and I had reached a time in our lives, our farm had gotten to a point where we either needed to buy bigger machinery, hire people to farm what we were doing, or we needed to, this newfangled no-till thing that was coming on. And so I took a trip and went up to Dakota Lakes and different things, came back, told my wife, I think we should try this. And so at the same time we went continuous crop, so we have no fallow in our cropping rotation. Every year, every acre's cropped, and good years and bad years. But I always tell people, they say, well, how does it work? Is it profitable? And I said, well, I'm still here. And if it wasn't going to work, I'd have been gone a long time. So I've been here, I came back to the farm in 1980. So I've been nearly 40 years at this deal, and I'm still kicking. So I guess there is that. So then about 2014, I'm going to keep looking at my son-in-law out here. He's my partner in all this, and my 2 daughters. But anyway, about 2014, a friend of ours, a relative of mine, a nephew, said, you need to go over to that No-Till on the Plains conference. And he said, there's guys are talking about this whole regenerative ag thing. And of course, I thought I was pretty smart. I've been doing this for a long time. Went over there, and of course they were about year 3, so it was like swallowing a fire hose. I mean, they had some high-level speakers, and they were talking about some pretty sophisticated stuff. And I came back completely dizzy. I just didn't know anything about anything. But man, it was the same thing in 1997 that hit me, that no-till made sense. And what these guys were talking about made sense to me. And my son-in-law may want to kick me in the rear end, but when I decide that this is right, the right thing to do, then we just go. We don't. Everybody says, "Oh, go do a little plot and do this, that, and the other," and it's like, if it feels right and it's the right thing to do, we just do the whole farm. So we've gone completely now. So we went from no-till, and now. Of course, we were spraying 4 or 5 times a year. We had a pretty diverse chemical lineup. We're down to about maybe 2 sprays a year for our whole thing, and we're down to about 3 chemistries. We've dramatically reduced our input costs. The other thing is, so during this period of time with no-till, we were soil testing every field every year. So we had a really good record on what was going on our farm as we moved into no-till. And I had an agronomist friend, and he had told me, oh, you don't want to do this, you'll be mining the soil and all these things. And as we started cycling our nutrients, our soil tests kept telling us, you need less fertilizer. And so, gosh, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, we quit using pop-up fertilizer, starter fertilizer. And then a couple years after that, we quit using nitrogen. And, I won't lie to you and say, oh, we just went on. There was a drop, but our drop in production was way more offset by our drop in our input costs. Now, I couldn't go down to the coffee shop and brag about my yields, and my corn probably wasn't as tall, and these different things, but it's about profitability. That's the bottom line. And if you need to brag at the coffee shop, this may not be for you. You'll have to stay on the other track. But anyway, so then as we have found out, so then we started using the Haney test, which is a soil test that looks more at the biological activity that's going on. And we found out that a lot of times we have 50, 60 pounds of N available for our crops. Well, that's kind of what we were putting on for our dryland corn and stuff. And then you find out, research now tells us that of every pound of fertilizer you put on, you're only maybe utilizing 10 or 20%. The rest goes somewhere else. So when you start going through the mental exercises, and then what the history that we kind of had, it just all kind of made sense. So then it's kind of an interesting deal. Once you open your mind to these concepts, all of a sudden other concepts become not quite so foreign to you. And so now this cover crop thing came in, and common sense would tell you in this part of the world, oh, we just don't have enough moisture for cover crops. But if you you talk to the people and you research it, you find out that as you build your soil carbon, then it's a snowball effect, and you have more moisture available, you retain more moisture, Now, it's not magic. If it doesn't rain, it doesn't work, just plain and simple. But we are seeing good things. Since 97, we have brought our organic matter. We were probably running a lot of 0.5 to 0.75% soil organic matter, and now we're high 2s. We maybe every once in a while, depending on the rotation, we might jump over 3. And they tell us that once you break over 3, if you can consistently do that, things start working better. So that's where we're pushing to. This year we had a roller crimper built for us. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that roller crimper, but what it does, so we had a cereal rye, and I know that I can hear the gasping in the crowd right now, but cereal rye is our main tool. And it's an amazing plant. It has a very fibrous root system. It has a high carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you have a good rye crop, you can have 2 successive crops and still have an interesting, significant mat on the ground, and that is our herbicide. And so it's easy to terminate with glyphosate, but as we want to move away from our chemicals, we are looking at the roller crimper. And so this year we roller crimped about 200, almost 300 acres, and we've got sunflowers and corn planted in that. And they're coming, so we'll see. We also have diversified some of our crops. Traditionally, our cropping rotation was we would do wheat, corn, sunflowers, and millet, kind of in that, and then we would direct seed wheat back into the millet. We didn't like that rotation because if the millet went in late, it came off late, our wheat was late, those kind of things. So we started bringing oats in. This year we've got buckwheat, we've got chickpea, and then we're moving away from monoculture crops. So a lot of our crops, like our millets, will have radishes, forage collards, buckwheat in it. And so we do these things so that we have a diversity right in the growing crop. And now we have a seed cleaning business, so we're able to bring that out. And then what we do is we clean that, we pull out the different components, and like the buckwheat and some of those, we'll put those back in our own for cover crop mixes. And of course we got golden German millet and proso millet. And then what we're trying to do, if you've looked at cover crops, they're expensive. And so what we try to do is raise as many, in the same sense that in a sunflower crop following corn is a weed, that is sunflowers and things can be cover crop components. It's kind of the other side of that coin. So we raise we've got flax, we raise flax, not this year, but we have in the past. So, and you just store those and we make our own mixes. So what we do is we buy the exotic components, forage collards, radishes, some of that stuff that we can't raise, and then we just do our own mixing and we make our own blends. And so anyway, then I was raised, we had no livestock on the farm. And so then my daughter married Pat, and he's a cow guy. So all of a sudden we've got livestock in the deal. Well, happens that's the next step, is to integrate livestock into this. And so then we're raising livestock on these cover crops, and so then that was like, well, maybe we should look at a grass-fed kind of a scenario. And so that, now the purists they'd argue with me about it being grass-fed, but it sure makes good meat, so we go ahead anyway. And we're not dishonest about it, we tell them what's going on. Next year we hope to range swine, hogs, and I don't know, we'd like to try some sheep, because what we'd like to do, diversity is the key to this, and I think that's kind of what Tom was alluding to. On every level, nature is diverse, and that's what we're trying to mimic. And so we're even we'd like to bring sheep and our hogs and our cattle, and I don't know if we'll run them together or separately, but in a rotation kind of a deal to bring diversity, because they all bring different components to what we're trying to do. Stripper head, we moved to the stripper head to maintain our residue. We moved to a single disc opener drills. For our ideal is to go through the ground, go through a field when it's drilled and you don't even know we were there. That would be our ideal. And so those are some little, you don't have to have those things. Those are the little add-ons. Those are the little pieces on the side that help as you go. What am I missing? Anyway. Oh, and so another thing we're going to be adding this year is interseeding. So when our corn and our sunflowers get up, corn, they say V5, V6, and sunflowers before they close, we're going to come in and we're going to plant like when the sunflowers. So sunflowers like pollinators, so we'll probably be looking at flax, and we'll be looking at buckwheat, and then we'll probably, in those, we're going to be putting some cereal rye as a relay crop, so that when that cash crop comes off, we've already got something green and growing that'll take us into winter before it terminates. Same thing will be going on in the corn. The corn will probably be looking at some legumes because it's a high nitrogen user. So those are some of the mindset that we look at. So anyway, that's kind of what we're doing. So I'll shut up and sorry. You give me the floor and look at it.
I knew what I was doing.
Well, can you hear me? Yeah. I enjoyed hearing from Tom and Curtis here. So just give you a little introduction and some grounding, some context, and then I think it's kind of questions and answers is the format, from my understanding. My name is Byron Shelton. I live in Buena Vista, Colorado, actually. I manage the West Bijou Ranch that Savory Institute owns, which is south of Byers, about 15 miles. My role with Savory Institute is to train trainers. Just a little bit more on Savory. I was teaching high school agriculture in Paonia on the western slope years ago, and I heard Alan Savory speak. And Alan was from Zimbabwe, and he was a wildlife biologist who had hated cattle and ended up, after a career in sorting things out, figuring out we've got to replace wildlife until we get them back with domesticated livestock to make the environment work. And there's just no question about it. And I thought, well, what does that mean, and how does that work? So that caught my interest. And through the years, I have tried to learn and been a trainer. My role right now is trainer of trainers. We've got about 50 learning sites in the last 10 years around the world. We're trying to get to 100 by 2025, and so my role is to travel and do the training of trainers at the different sites, along with managing one of two ranches Savory Institute owns. One in Zimbabwe, where Alan Savory is from, and the one here in Colorado. Cool. You know, early NRCS textbooks or little pamphlets will tell us that there's been over 20 civilizations that we've lost, that have come and gone. And they were all organic. But they lost their soil, and they lost their water, they lost their ability to have any resources to raise anything on. And yet they could just move on. We don't really have anywhere else to go right now. So Maureen had said, this is based on regenerative ag, this talk tonight, and what is regenerative ag? Well, to me, and you described it well in what you guys were saying, if the soil is able to be working better, if those ecosystem processes are working, where a 5-inch rain in the spring and a 5-inch in the fall, 10 inches will carry us in what would normally be, a friend of mine's in West Texas with Mason, Texas, anyway, Central Texas. He's told me that they live where they normally get 28 inches of moisture. But he can now make it, he says, if I get a good 5 inches in the spring and 5 inches in the fall, I can make, because he's using all of it. We live over, West Bijou. We're on the West Bijou Creek. We're not at 14, we're more like 12 inches of moisture, but I'll guarantee we're not using more than 6 right now. Wow. It's running off. Wow. So even if it comes, did we do the best we could to prepare to make it effective when it came? Wow. So to me, regenerative agriculture means the water cycle is more effective, plants are growing and decaying better, more effectively. We're catching more of the sunlight when we can. You're not letting it sit fallow all year. You're catching energy. And we're trying to have the most complex diversity of plants we can in animals. And it was that perennial polycultures, that rangeland, that built the soils of the world and can sequester more carbon, we're told, than a forest, or just as much, it's just underground. And once that soil is built, we can then tear it up and raise crops or monocultures. But that's the tough part to do. How do we do that? I want to talk to you more, Curtis, after this. Because we are all about 7,500 acres of pasture, of rangeland. We've got a small 70 acres of cropland. The pasture land, if you've ever thought about it, covered ground and perennial plants and a mix of all the kind of plants you can do. That's what nature does. So we're not fighting nature there. With a few missing environmental things we didn't understand that Alan Savory put together from his own research and others, there's some missing environmental things we need to know, but we can still replicate nature. When we try to raise the monoculture, the crop on those soils, it goes downhill. And then how do we do that to build soil back? Even how do we do the ranching part right? We just, we have about 4 mammals on our place. We're running bison right now. We could run some cattle too. And we've got mule deer and white-tailed deer and antelope. There used to be 40 different, tens of thousands of years ago, animals there that were hoeing the ground. And when you take a piece of equipment and you till across the ground, it loosens it up and you can raise something. On pastures, we have to do the same thing and mimic it, but with the animal hoes. So anyway, just to shorten this up, Savory Institute is trying to learn and be a demonstration site and help farmers and ranchers around the world on how do we regenerate land. So that, because once it's regenerating, then we're going to have more farms. And my family, my roots go back to Hayden up west of Steamboat and out to Julesburg. And both places are dying except for the tourism up in the mountains. Is Joe's going to be here in another 50 years? Is Joe? We hope so.
Well,
We hope maybe there's a town in between them again because we've got more people on the land because the soil's regenerated and it regenerates some communities. Because if we're the ones who support city-based civilization, if we're not here, they're not there. We need to regenerate the soil. So my wife and I personally leased several different ranches. We raised grass-fed beef from the late 90s up till 2010. I went to Virginia for a while and managed a place west of DC. We were raising in a whole different climate, 1,000 chickens a week into a farmer's market, 6 beef a week, 6 lambs, 6 hogs. It was a pretty, all meat, in the middle of all this horse country, it was all meat-based operation just into the city or our restaurant. I only mention that just to give some background. People are trying to do this all over, to do this, get back to the land. I think I'll just leave it at that, a little bit of introduction.
wow. Bravo.
Questions, huh?
Yeah.
Don't know
Don't-
where to begin.
Surely somebody's got a question. Yes.
So it's super inspiring what you guys are doing and the ideas that it's more global in terms of what we can do. How are you all kind of reaching out to your community to kind of raise up the awareness of the innovation that you all are doing?
Well, I guess I'll start this conversation. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
So, Joni Mitchell back here, she should explain it, but there's what do you call it, a research program? What are we called?
Yeah.
Farms. And so the format of that was that they had what they called long-term practitioners, which would be guys like me. And then they had younger guys that were interested in this. And so it's a mentorship kind of a deal, and we're in 3 states, right? Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska. Anyway, and I'm going to relate to you. So your question indicates to me that you think it's easy to sit back and talk to our neighbors.
Oh, I don't think that at all.
Okay.
But because I know that that's really hard, and I think that what my question is like, how can we, as neighbors, like come in and educate one another and think about things together? And I know that's like almost impossible, but like what you guys are saying is so inspiring in that way of like, let's think about these pigs, let's think about them as a whole.
Well, I don't know if it's a herd mentality or whatever, but I've had several of these young guys say to me, you know, I started doing these things, and my neighbors treat me different. They're not nearly as friendly to me, and that's right. And I had one young guy, he's over in Kansas, just across the border, and he goes, I called him up, Jay, how's it going? He goes, man, I can't wait till we get back to a conference with guys, because my neighbors are like, they just treat me like I have the plague. And I don't understand that. You would think there would be a curiosity. Now, I'm probably not showing them anything that they're like, I want to do that. They're probably like, what in the heck is that guy doing? But those guys are a lot better farmers than me, and I'm sure that what they're doing is good. But there's this mentality that if you're not doing what I'm doing and what everybody else is doing, we kind of outcast you, and that's a psychological thing, and it's hard to get around that. So I don't have a solution for that. Just 40 years ago, I guess I'm stubborn enough. I just decided that I'm going to do this, and I just went on and did it. So, Tom, what do you think? Try. You guys did here. Not out of it. You just slide her up. There you go.
Yeah, well, you're right. Am I on?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you think about how long managed grazing has been around. There are very few units in Yuma County that are actually doing it. Those that do it are pretty successful, but they're also part of the large commodity meat business. So they're connected to feed yards and that type of thing. What we're doing is, nobody else does what we're doing in Yuma County. The interest comes from the Front Range. That's where the interest comes, and that's where there's possibilities of expanding markets, but it's all on the consumer side. And I think that it's all of these things. It's really about your food and how healthful and wholesome your food is, because most food now is commodity food. And if you look at beef, which I know the best about, I mean, we got 5 big things to fight in beef: antibiotics, hormones, beta agonists, which nobody knows anything about, E. coli, and now down the road we're going to have genetically modified beef. Nobody really wants to have that in their diet. And so people find us who want to steer away from it. But in terms of expanding that market, we don't spend near enough for food in this country. Like 7% of our income. That's really obscenely low, and that's one reason. That also puts a drag on innovations in agriculture. I think, we should really be spending 10 to 15%. 20% would not be out of line for food, and then you could really see some of these innovative ways of growing food. Less chemicals, only 1 glyphosate a year, maybe no glyphosate a year. You think about all the news glyphosate gets now. I mean, to do what Curtis is doing that's a great benefit to community health, to be able to get rid of a chemical that a few years ago we all thought, oh, well, it's safe, it doesn't affect mammals. Well, unfortunately, it kills the soil, and it kills the living biology there that's really the most important to all of us, and that's fungi and bacteria. So I think that the movement, if there ever is one, it comes from urban areas. It's not easy what Keith and I do. I mean, we're not very big, but without a significant capital investment, we would have a very hard time expanding beyond 1,100 acres and 80 head a year. I mean, 80 head a year means we're running 160 head, because grass-fed beef, to do it right, minimum 24 months of age. All these things are different. They add cost, and so consumers have to recognize that that cost is beneficial to not only their health, the health of their families. That's really where it's at, where it's got to come to.
You can't tell anybody something unless they're ready. They've got to be, seems to me all we can be is an example. And there's peer pressure for adults just like anybody else. And you have to be willing. I mean, you stood out 40 years ago. Somebody who's done something their whole life and is willing to change and do it differently, take a farmer or any profession, but take that farmer or rancher, you really have to respect them because they could be who they are is what they've done. And now you're saying, well, what I did wasn't right. Some people will go to their grave without changing, even if they start to see it's wrong, because that's just who they are. So you have to have compassion, I think, and respect for those who've done it a certain way. And those who really are open and change, I think is really, you really respect them. Because we're all learning things, and yet we're all ingrained in things that we learn later weren't true. I was thinking about, I just wanted to comment that there were several things learned about the environment, the role of the animal, the role of the predator, and by the animal I mean the ruminant, the one with the stomach that can eat and digest things we can't do directly. Not pigs, not chickens, they have a role too, but the ruminant can eat all this undigestible forage and turn it into something we can use. There's a role there, and whether you ever eat that animal or use the hide, that's what makes if you drink water, you need to be for supporting ruminants on the land, if you truly understand. You don't have to eat the animals. But that's one of these environmental missing elements, the role of the ruminant, the role of the predator, and the role of the timing to manage them. But there wasn't success being found on ranches worldwide until we started changing how we were thinking and making our choices. It's really decision making and management is the problem. I think about like this phone, it's very complicated. But if one thing breaks, it stops. So we call it, for lack of another term, let's call it complicated. We put a man on the moon. We flew a drone on Mars in the last month, didn't we? That's pretty complicated. But we're living in eroding watersheds. What's the difference? We're managing complexity. And for lack of a better term, I'll call it complexity. That's where when you change something, it doesn't stop. It morphs, it's self-organizing, it keeps going. And farmers and ranchers are managing not complicatedness, things we make. They're managing things we manage. And that's the economy and the environment and people. You're asking land managers to manage three complex things that keep going and moving. That's what's hard. And the success that management, when it started looking at the whole picture, hence the term holistic management, when that management was overlaid on top of the missing environmental keys that we didn't understand about how to truly create soil, that's when we started getting success on a consistent basis.
Yeah, hey, I want to throw one at Curtis. I'm a grass manager, I'm not a farmer. Everything I know about farming I learned from guys like Curtis, a lot from Curtis, but other people I've met at like the Holyoke Fair. But I would like you to riff a little bit on the profitability of what you're talking about. And I'm thinking about that graph that you see at a lot of conferences. You know the one I'm talking about. So you describe that to them and tell us what that's about.
It was data that was collected in Canada, actually. And so what it showed dissed and swept, and they just threw it all away. So that's the common answer. That's why we're trying to push through that. Our ideal, my ideal, maybe I should say my ideal. I keep dragging my family into this. I think they're just along for the ride. But anyway, my ideal is, and think about this, it's organic no-till. Organic no-till. And if we can do that in eastern Colorado, you can do it anywhere in the world. We have the most fragile soils, we have the most fragile environment to grow crops. If we can do it here, it can be done absolutely anywhere. But it's strategic use of cover crops, rolling cover crops, letting that be your herbicides, strategic cropping systems, and all this holistic stuff. So that's where we've got to. And one of the things that troubled me, and I guess I'll wax a little philosophical since you gave me the mic back. Anyway, one of the things that troubled me several years ago, I started to see agriculture. Thou shalt use this seed with this chemical, and not yet, but this fungicide, and maybe someday even this fertilizer. And I've been in this business, this game long enough to know that the books are always balanced on the production farmer. Everybody above me, the chemical guy, the fertilizer guy, the guy that buys my crops, on up the line, they all drive new pickups every year or every 2 years, and I'm banging around on my old 2001 with 400,000 miles on it. You see what I'm saying? And so I got to seeing that agriculture was getting sucked into a rut that we were not going to be able to get out of. We were going to be locked in. And that was one of those little voices in the back of my mind that started saying, maybe we need to be looking at something different here. Another thing that I think you guys both alluded to, that agriculture, at least production agriculture that I'm in, and the commodities, it's high volume, low margin. And that's why we've seen the small farms go away and farms keep getting bigger, is because my margin keeps getting smaller. I have to have more acres to make enough to live off of. So then you have a young guy that wants to farm. You can only imagine this. I mean, it's just impossible unless he's got dad or grandpa or both. And I think kind of to answer whoever asked about how it was going to start, one of the things, Tom's right, from the consumer side, but the guys that are going to change this is the young farmers, because they can't do it the way that it was used to be done. They can't go out and buy 3,000 acres and the equipment that goes with it and all the stuff to get started. And they've got to think different, because there's just going to be demanded of them if they're going to be successful in this. And that's why these young guys in farms and that you see a lot of innovation, and they're not tired. They haven't been fighting the fight for 40 years. They still think they can do something better. So
You're not tired. I can hear the spark in your voice.
But anyway, it's the young guys, and that's why I'm, with my son-in-law and with the guys on farms. These are the guys we've got to get inspired and let them know that they're on the right path, and keep slugging away. Sorry, I get up philosophical and everybody gets quiet.
That's great. We're all
great.
soaking it in.
Yeah.
Well, I'll add to the philosophical then. Doesn't that mean if we have to change that there's more opportunity? We haven't figured it out yet necessarily, but if we have to change, the whole world's open for how we're going to do it different. We have some clues.
As in most things in agriculture, or in life actually, when the herd's going this way, there's opportunities to go this way. And that's where we're at. We're trying to look.
Yeah, in the coffee shop that way.
You had a question.
This is a comment, actually. I was in a work session one night with someone who married into one of our big family farms down here in this area, and she has done a lot of research and would really like to make some changes. And I told her, you can have a big impact here if you can get this going with your family. So for whatever that's worth.
I have a question.
Was that good advice?
Well, it is good advice, but depending on the dynamics, right? If you have grandpa and dad, and they did it this way for this many years, and by God, you're a young whippersnapper, you're not gonna come in here and tell me how to do it. You
Right.
know what I'm saying?
Yes.
If, you know, it would be a challenge, and depending on the dynamics, but you're right, that's how it kinda has to creep in.
Yeah.
And just to comment to her comment, just a minute. We're all tied, or I'll say me, to the strong feeling of land ownership that I have to own the land. So whether it's your case where they own it and they try to change over time, or just access to land and being able to manage it is really the key. And anybody can make changes for positive or negative.
Well, I just wanted to ask you, does CSU teach any of these kind of things?
Careful.
I know that's a loaded question.
Why, Marie, you teed that one.
From my perspective, the short answer is no.
CSU
You
teaching.
find individuals in academia or in Bureau of Land Management or NRCS who are very open to some new ideas, but the nature of a bureaucracy is very hard to change. Just like a farm that has a grandparents that will not change, and it makes it very difficult. And many times they're not leadership doesn't come from there.
Hang on.
Not that individuals
what
don't
should
really
be-
try.
From what should be the obvious place, it seems like. But I kind of knew the answer to that too, but.
Yeah, I'll give you a little anecdote
You're
about
stirring
that,
the
but I
pot.
do want to, I just have an anecdote. Curtis probably has something of real value. A young man, we all know, North Yuma, came back from CSU, got his degree in agronomy. He's working on the farm for a while now, he's off crop consulting. And I asked him, I was just getting interested in this stuff, reading about it and associating with people like Curtis. And I asked him one day, I said, hey, and for me, you can boil it. I mean, I like to simplify things maybe too much, but it kind of boils down to organic matter. If you're raising organic matter, whatever you're doing, you're probably doing it right. And I asked Mark, hey, what do they teach you? This is less than 10 years ago. It's probably getting on to 5 to 10 years ago. Hey, what do they teach you about organic matter in your soils class? Mark, you're going to start with 1% and you're going to end with 1%. That was from CSU.
Oh, dear.
And I would add to cover myself too. We work with CSU. We were working with their soils labs. We were in the process of trying to get more connections and more connectivity there to test for our organic matter, for example, and other things. Organic matter is a lagging indicator. Managers need to know the leading indicators of the ecosystem processes, and then how many more ravens you have, or coyotes, or red-tailed hawks, or organic matter, or carbon. Those are all good, but those are lagging indicators. Managers have to be running on year-to-year leading indicators.
Well, prior to us getting involved with farms, we worked with CSU. And they have, Megan Skapansky was a researcher that they brought in. And they kind of gave her free range and got some farmers like myself, and they were looking more holistically. So the way researchers work is they want to only look at one thing, and they want to eliminate everything else so that we can study that one thing. And you know, you can understand how that is, right? But the problem is that's not how nature works. It's a holistic system. And so her and her researchers came out because we had been long-term no-till and stuff, and we looked at whole fields. And we took soil samples across the whole field, and we looked at all the interactions and all that stuff. Now, that's very complicated to analyze because you have so many variables. And the interactions of variables, that's why nobody does that, right? Because it's just insanely complicated. But people are starting to, and that's what farms is about. We're getting whole farms, and we're looking at it from a holistic standpoint. And that's an alien concept to researchers because they want to avoid they want to look at one variable at a time. They can't look at the whole system because it's so hard to analyze. So that's that's the reality of of why they're doing it. It's not. But then, and I can tell a story. I know, be careful. Anyway, Ray Archuleta is a name that you'll hear. And Ray Archuleta was in NRCS for many years. And if you'll remember the year of the soil, that was kind of one of Ray's deals. You know, he was right in the middle of that. And Ray kind of told me, sort of in an abstract way, that they kind of gave him the other NRCS people kind of gave him rope, and then it was like, you know, my whole career has been doing this, and now you're coming in and telling me that I've been wrong, all that. And there was kind of a blowback, and that's kind of when Ray decided to leave NRCS and started his own consulting firm. So there's so many dynamics, and so many of them are political and emotional. They're not science-based, and that's the sad part of where we're at.
Well,
And that's where you've got to be stubborn.
Yeah, right. Well, and you were talking about young people who are going to have to make the changes. And, you know, it's too bad that they don't put some of those things in their, in their heads so that they can...
When they're at school.
Yeah.
Well, but so you go up to the research, ARS research station, and if you go through their field day, the first 30 minutes, they talk about all of their sponsors. Seed, fertilizer, right? That's their sponsors. So are they going to come out with research that says all that stuff's crap? Excuse my French? No. I mean, you know, they're running a business there, right? So that's hard. And, you know, back to the reality of where we're at.
Very.
Yeah, what's researched isn't always what needs to be researched. The people on the ground almost should be driving the research they need, and then let the researcher go and study it, and we need that. Figure out how things work, from the soil food web to anything else that people are studying. But they shouldn't be the ones driving it. It's no different than the banker or the accountant driving the decisions on a family farm. You know, maybe if you've used that person for 3 generations and they're literally a family member, they could do that. But otherwise, they're an expert you go to get information, then you make your own choice. And it's the same with research.
Well, and I think that model changed. It's been 10 or 15 years ago. A lot of the land grant research, I think, was tax-based. You know, they just got money, and then that kind of dried up, so then they went to another source for their funding. And then it became out-based research, meaning that the outcome of my research is based on the amount of money you give me. I know that's not
It is a failure
it's
of the
definitely
tax
truth
system
to
that
it.
we left our public institutions, we hung them out, and they had to go get the money wherever they could find it.
Yeah, we have the research farm at Yuma too that should...
Yeah, don't get me started on that one.
Okay.
But that's where the research that Megan was doing at CSU, the research that's being done at with farms. So this is independent. Those ladies applied and got a grant, and so there's nobody, and they're working really hard to stay independent on that, so that research. So back to, and another reason these things don't change. So like for production agriculture, for example, we have Farm Service, which used to be USDA, right? That's where we get our checks from. Those guys. We've worked with Senator Bennett. He's been out to our farm looking at what we're doing. He was very instrumental in getting some regenerative ag things put into the new farm bill. So that branch is saying, we want to see you guys doing this. And, you know, Sarah grants and all this kind of stuff. Well, we want to help that. RMA, risk management, which is our crop insurance, they're like, thou shalt not do those things, or thou shalt be standing by yourself. And so the government can't even get going in the same direction. And so now you've got farmers out here and they're going, well, I'd love to do that, but I've got to stand all of that risk on my own. And some guys just, either they have a certain amount of risk aversion, or they just financially can't do it.
So,
Thought I saw
Maybe talk about the good part of it. The change point. That you're like, aha, of like, while you're doing this, your ownership of the land and your mindset. You know, you used to talk about like, I go out and I'd be so proud about all the weeds I killed and how your mindset has changed and how that maybe has emotionally impacted you a little bit.
That's a good point.
Well, I shouldn't be stealing the floor, I got the gift of gab, I guess. Well, she's absolutely right. So, and this was one of those aha moments here about a month ago. So we're running these cattle now, and my view of my cropland was always from a sprayer at 10 mile an hour, 12 mile an hour combine, and I'm concentrating on things. So now we're paddock grazing, so we're moving these cattle through these strips, and I'm out there on our four-wheeler, and I'm so much more in touch with my soil, because I see things. What is that? And well, look at the worms. There have been a lot of worms here. There's worm castings all over. Or what is that plant? And anyway, about a month ago, it came to me that, weeds are not weeds anymore to me. They're indicators. They're telling me what's going on in my system. And if I've got kochia, that's telling me something. If I've got pruned grass, that's telling me something. And they're still weeds, right? And you don't want them. But they're more importantly, they're indicators as to what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. I just get all excited now when I stop somewhere. Unfortunately, my wife's not here. She just like roll her eyes, but it's like, look at all the wormholes, and then I get down on my hands and knees and I'm digging around worm castings. That's a really good sign. Worms are a good sign. If your system's starting to change, worms are a good sign. And so then I'm like, geez, I wish I could do this all the way across the field or whatever. Bugs. I'm way more in touch with bugs. But I think a deeper, and maybe this is where Audrey's wanting me to go to, is I guess I've come to a point, and I don't know if I've only got about, 6 or 7 more harvests in here, and then I'm done. And when you look at it that way, that really, is, at my age, that brings focus to where you're at. But anyway, if I could pass on a farm to my family that's not yoked to chemicals and fertilizers and GMOs and all that stuff, that would be a true legacy for me. I don't know if I can achieve it, but I'm trying hard to get there. That's what I really would like to see. So I'll quit.
Yeah.
For a little while.
Awesome.
Not too. You're doing something.
I guess maybe
Weeds
I'd
are-
ask the same question for Tom too. You talked about of 10 years, 3 of them are drought, maybe 1 is wet, and then you've got 6 years that are maybe dry. So that's a struggle. Every 10 years is a struggle, and you're doing it with your son now. But what makes you keep going?
Don't know no better.
Your
Well,
mic's hot.
We are a little different. We don't have a ranching legacy, number one. So my greatest fear is that I know when this property turns over, all the fences will come out and it'll go back to grama grass and buffalo grass. That would be my fear. On my hope side, it's day to day in this season. It's the same thing that Curtis is talking about. It's the pleasure of, I've never seen, we saw penstemon this year, we saw larkspur, we've got all the other common flowers, but those are indicators that, well, in this case, it's probably an indicator of rain in the spring. But the idea is to see those every year if you have good cover and you can, insulate your soil from evaporation, all those things. Get your stocking right. You'll see all those things. So ours is more of a short term. It's the pleasure of I've always been interested in grasslands from before I went to university, and so it's about doing the best I can with the grass that is under my control at the moment. But I unfortunately, I know what's going to happen to this in 10 or 15 years when I have to give it up. I know exactly what's going to happen to it.
From a family standpoint, I really, is this still on? I relate a lot to what Curtis and Tom have both said. And from the Savory Institute standpoint, our mission is to regenerate the grasslands of the world so that everybody and families can make it work. weeds, back to your comment about, even on some of our pasture land, when we get it stirred up a little bit, there's bare ground between those plants, and we'll see more weeds. But soil doesn't, that bare ground, you can't just throw a little fine-seeded grass plant in there and expect it to grow. It's kind of like these mountain fires, and the aspen come up first, and then the spruce and all the pines come up through them, and the aspen are a cover crop. These weeds are the first pioneer species that need to come. And when we're farming and keeping it bare ground, we're just always fighting weeds, and so you're trying to get beyond that. When we're working with perennial polyculture, just perennial plants of all different kinds, you're trying to work through the weed stage to the higher successional plants and not get sidetracked. So I get a bunch of cheatgrass these last 3 years. It's not taking over. For whatever reason, more rain some springs, but I'll take it. Whatever will grow, I'll take it because it's going to cover the ground. If I can eat it because we happen to be there right when it's green, great. But the whole rest of the year, I don't care. It will be on the ground as plant litter and start to give the habitat for other seeds to come. I have to be careful that I don't start timing my grazing to get the cheatgrass. I've got to be watching for the little spruce trees coming up in the aspen. I've got to be watching for those perennial plants I want. And once they're starting to come up in the cheat, I can never look at the cheat again. I have to focus on what I want, not what I don't want. Or I won't have it. I'll keep it in the cheatgrass stage. And I can't blame it on cheatgrass. Cheatgrass isn't taking over. It's my management that's allowing it to take it over. Or not.
I completely agree with you. Most of my ranching buddies that we talk about this, it's all about, I got to get out there and get the cheatgrass. Well, the problem is, you'll never get it because it grows so fast. What really happens though while you're trying to get that, if you're not really moving fast across it, they start to bite these little green shoots from the higher succession grasses that you want, and they really set those back. So you're out there, I don't think you should worry about getting cheatgrass. You get up some benefit in April and the early part of May, but you don't want to focus on that. You gotta be careful you don't damage those long-term perennial grasses, which are really the heart of the system.
Okay, now, from the farming side, I want to talk about perennial grasses, because first off, what we're doing is not easy. There are lots, and not because of the coffee shop, but because we are changing our system that has taken many, many years to get where we're at. I don't know when the grass was broke, but we've been degrading our soil since the day the first plow turned it. All right, so we're trying to turn that over in a lifetime, and it's been probably 2 or 3 lifetimes. I don't know, 4 lifetimes. So one of the problems that we have, and it in some places it's pretty substantial, but we have a perennial grass, go back grasses, 3 on, windmill grass come back in, and my first reaction, I got to get more chemical, I got to beat that back, and then finally it's like, well, that's telling me that my system's wrong, right? I don't have enough residue. Nature does not like to be naked. And if you screw around and leave her naked, she will cover it up. And so that's what's happening, right? And so we had a guy come out, and he had worked with Alan in South Africa. And they wanted to talk to us about compost and compost extract. And I said, well, geez, if you worked with Alan, I should shut up and you should talk, because But anyway, he made me feel better. He said, well, what you're seeing is your system is shifting, and these are transitional grasses that you're moving through. Now, we still have to make a profit off those acres, and that's where the trick comes. Grazing can help those things. But this is where you have to change your mindset. My mind, so I'll tell you another story related to this. So, family deal. My brother inherited some ground that I'd been farming. He didn't want me to farm it anymore, so he sold it. So the neighbor comes, and right off the bat, he double discs it. He discs it east and west, turns right around, discs it north and south, and then sprayed it with something that was crazy. Well, those grasses are still there. after all of that. So what it's telling me is, in K-State, we were almost involved with some research with K-State, and they were going to look at strategic tillage to take care of perennial grasses. There's nothing strategic. It's going to be full-blown 2 years tillage to get that grass out of there. Well, I don't want to back up, because I know tillage would take it out, right, eventually. But I don't want to back up, because then I set my whole system back. So what we're trying to do is find a way to push on through that. That's where research should be helping us, and there's just no research that wants to look at those things. And it's a common problem with long-term zero-till in eastern Colorado. I watch my neighbors, and they're not even zero-till, but they only till maybe once every 4 or 5 years. But depending on their rotation and stuff, I can see those patches coming in. So it's a common problem. That's where research could be helping us, you know.
Right.
But anyway, it's not easy. But at first I thought it was rationalization, but then after talking to the guy that had worked with Savory, it made me feel better that it's just nature telling me I'm on the right path. We just got to work through this.
I'm not sure I'm smart enough to ask questions, but here goes. So we have what has been termed, from what I've learned from the family, native sod or native pasture. So are you saying we should go in there and mess with that or just leave it alone? Somebody indicated maybe we should go in and open it up a little bit, till it or something. Did I get that
Not
wrong?
me.
Not me. No, don't till it.
Byron.
It depends what you want to create. You know, people say we want land to be native or natural. Well, okay, do you want your place wherever you are to be like in 1850 or in 1000 AD or 10,000 BC?
I don't know what it's like then.
I don't know either. And so the key really is, what do we want it to be going forward?
It's just sitting there, but I mean, that's fine with me. And the ranchers like it because they rent it for their cattle. But then the other question I have is ground that we have in the Conservation Reserve Program. In looking to the future, if we wish to decide to take it out of that program, the grasses that are growing in there now, are they compatible with the regenerative farming program?
Well, I think usually, sure. Some of this is tied back to one of these key environmental principles we were missing. The reason the ruminant is so important, the ruminant animal, you know, we always want more moisture. We want things to grow, so we wish it would rain or have heavy dew every morning or something. But we forget we need moisture for decay. And we live here where when things grow, they don't decay. And if you walk around your pasture, if you see green, it's this year. If you see brown colored grass, it's this year or maybe 1 or 2 years old. But if you see it gray, whether it's standing up or laying on the ground, it's actually rusting or oxidizing into the air because there's not enough moisture for all the microbes to live on the soil surface to take it into the ground and decay.
Wow.
Think about where is in our environment here, where above ground, out on a pasture, do you have year-round moisture? It's in the rumen of the ruminant. You've got mobile fermentation vats walking all over. They're ingesting or they're trampling, but one way or another they're getting it on the ground. If you take that away, it broke the system. So to have your pasture most productive, one challenge with CRP in our environment where we don't have regular humidity, we're using the tool of rest. That means CRP wants typically no fire and usually no grazing and no technology. So that means you're choosing the tool of rest. That is a choice. You're leaving it alone. Our environment doesn't have enough regular humidity, so CRP land in eastern Kansas may do real well. It'll grow and decay and get better. Our CRP ground will grow and get stunted and can't decay and become unusable. So your question is specific. I don't know that I answered that, but how we manage tools, depending on that degree of humidity, we get different results. And then you have to know what you're trying to create and work to move it there.
Well, you know, I'd agree. I guess what you have to decide is what you want to do. But I can relate it. So I'm going to talk about Pat Morgan here. So they have some CRP that came out, and they don't want to till it. So we're looking seriously at trying to move to organic no-till in it. And in our part of the world, that's really, really hard. But it's going to take a lot of grazing. We've got it. And the other thing, I think this came out of my perennial grass issue, because one of the things you want to have is so the whole regenerative thing, if you boil it down to the bottom line, it's about collecting solar energy, putting that energy into the ground. That's what it's all about. And the longer you have a growing plant and a living root, the more carbon that you can put in that soil. Once carbon's there, your biology increases, you have better reservoir for your moisture when it comes, you have better infiltration, you have everything. That's what it's all about. But somewhere in there, you got to get some money off it, right? So anyway, one of the problems that we have in our part of the world is like by the time you take corn or sunflowers off, you may not have the growing season to get a crop planted in there like they do east of here. That's where our interseeding's coming in. But now we're kind of backing off on this perennial grass because we already have a plant now that's going to overwinter and grow and all these things. If we can suppress it enough that we can pull a little money off and leave it there, it may help us in the long run. Colin Zeiss from Australia we had the opportunity, he came to our farm. He actually looks at pasture cropping, in which they do both things. And so, I mean, that's an alien concept to you. I mean, but that's what they're doing, and it increases their profitability. They have a growing root more year round. So I don't have a solution for you. I know you have a problem, or you have a project.
I don't have a problem.
Yeah, but it just depends on how crazy you want to get.
Really? We have a reputation already on that. She agrees. Ask questions.
Well, as a person in this community who's not a producer, but somebody who's concerned about the future of the community in these towns, like what do people like myself do to support farmers? Because I do see that it is incredibly challenging, and there's a lot of obstacles between the bankers and policy. And so, are there any action steps for us non-producers who are concerned about change?
I would say this is a great start right here. I mean, I don't know. I look out and I see guys that I would say were farmers, and maybe they may go home and say that old boy's crazy as a pet coon, but they may read the farm articles a little different next time, and maybe they get maybe a seed's planted, and it's just one seed at a time. I don't know.
What's now become traditional agriculture, it's a mature industry. And as Curtis said earlier, it's very difficult to get started if you don't have that passed down or marry into it. And so helping others get started, that's why so many of them have shortened the supply chain. They're going direct to the consumer. They're trying to find a different way to do it, Maureen, so that they're cutting out the middleman that's taking the profit. They're trying to keep more of it themselves and trying to be more productive on less acreage. And overall, that's how you're going to have more people that will eventually be living in an area versus the margin getting so small, everything has to get bigger. And I suppose there'd be nothing wrong with that if you really didn't mind it, except it's not being done regeneratively. It is being done degeneratively at any size scale right now. So we just got to be able to build soil, and sustainability isn't good enough. Why should we be sustaining degraded soils? We need to truly regenerate. I mean, you've gone up from pushing 2 and 3%. How do we know you can't get it to 5 or 8? I mean, we don't know. We don't know the limit.
Only got 7 years, Kurt.
I know it. So just like us, one of the things that we've toyed with, so we'll raise 1,300 acres of sunflowers a year. This year we've got 160 acres of buckwheat. We would love to have bees. There's research that shows having bees around your sunflowers increases production 10-15%, whatever it is. If it increased at 1%, that'd be great. We just don't have people and time to do that. That would be a kind of a micro industry. But then you got to find some people that want to do that. And that opens up a whole nother day's discussion, you know, labor and where we're at and things like that.
Oh, yeah, for sure, even the grass-fed beef business. And my wife and I got to where it was just the two of us, and we were busier than heck, but to go larger, we would have had to really hire and scale up. There's going to be people, I think, in the future that are just, their whole job is they're finishing the grass-finished beef, and cow-calf producers are supplying to them. Everybody doesn't have the land or the skills or the expertise to finish grass-finished beef. I finished a lot of stuff that was too tough at the beginning. There's some skills, and so it's going to segment. And I don't think everybody in the Front Range is going to have an individual direct connection to their farmer, but those supply chains are going to change a little bit. We were going direct to consumers, as you guys are. One of the things that Savory Institute has started in this last couple of years, we're about several years into it, we have a certification program that's not certifying, we call it a verification program. You know, you can get certified that you're animal humane or welfare friendly, wildlife friendly, organic, grass-fed, all these things, and they're all good. But they're basically all a list of practices. If I do these practices, I'll be checked off. But we don't know that your land's improving. We truly don't know that. So we have EOV, Ecological Outcome Verification. And the land has to be showing that it's regenerating. And if it is, then you can put that seal on your pack. It's not saying the product is anything. It's saying it's coming from land that part of its life was proven to be regenerating. So that's the verification system that we've got. We've got almost 1 million acres now after 4 or 5 years worldwide in that program. And then back to back with that is what we call a land to market program. And that's for those that are beyond, like we're doing all our own marketing. We might put the land verification seal on it. But we put together regional or international brands with suppliers, with producers. Because producers work hard to raise a product. And it's not easy to sell. I mean, even though they say it is, it's still even not hard to find all the clients. So you have this product that's been raised, and if you can't find the consumer who appreciates it, it goes into the traditional market. And that's no good. And then you have retailers who are saying, we want to have regenerative leather, or dairy, or wool, or meat. And they can't find the producers. And so our land to market program is putting those together. We've got about 55 producers, and this is for producers who want to wholesale. They don't want to take it all retail themselves, but they can get hopefully better premium, but also a supply chain going there. We've got about 55 or 56 international markets right now. For example, UGG, the boot company, just signed a deal for $5 million worth of hides, and so we're trying to find the producers in the different spots that can produce that. So new markets, short markets, big, long, local or international. It's just we can't play the game the way it was played. Mm-hmm. We've got to regenerate soil, and markets usually need to change.
We've also thought about maybe internships and things like that to try to bring people out. One of the things many years ago that kind of frustrated me was that our VOAG instructors were coming out, and I would have, my naive assumption was those guys were going to be right on top of technology, the latest, and man, they weren't, and that was very disappointing. And
right.
So, gosh, we were doing so much more ahead of what they knew that it wasn't funny, and so maybe, that's where we have to get proactive.
Right.
Try to get those college kids out here, get them intrigued, and then they'll go back and, back to planting seeds, I guess.
I feel good about this conversation.
I do too.
So yeah, I think
Probably worth what we'll charge you for it.
you're all welcome to stay and linger. I think there's some more food and, any conversations to have after this. But thanks again, everyone, for being here, and thank you. Really, that was super interesting. And I forgot to get your permission, but I filmed this. Because I did get some people asking that wanted to be here that couldn't be here, so.
I would just like to say, I think it's great. In Joe's, to have 20 people show up, this is where the change is going to happen. So I really appreciate your all interest, and we're all just trying to figure this out.
Do you guys have any feedback on the farming that they're doing here? with your garden plots?
I haven't had a chance to walk through it yet, but my daughters did, and they thought it was pretty cool.
Okay.
It's artists as farmers, so just, remember that piece.
We're checking that out right now, see if that would be a fun we could do.
I don't know enough. Is Greg there?
Yeah, but I have nothing to do with this, it's Maureen.
I know, but
Okay.
to your question, I don't know enough specifically. I walked through there. My question would be, what can we do at scale? And will, however each of those crops is done, regenerate the soil? That's the trick. It isn't a matter of being drought resistant. Part of the reason we're in drought is because we have ineffective rainfall. Yeah, maybe the climate's changing, who knows, and we're getting less, but if we're not using what we're getting, then putting in a drought resistant crop to me is treating the effect. The cause is we're not using the rainfall we have because we're not preparing the soil to hold it by the things that these two guys were describing.
And
We're
I
gonna
don't know, maybe
intercede
you
for
know
sure.
what the YouTube, but
We're gonna
if you
start
ever, if you
interceding.
get bored, go on YouTube. Is it a TED Talk that Savory does where he talks about desertification? And
Yeah.
by our tilling, we're actually creating our own desert. And get your mind around that concept, around
TED Talk.
the world we live in.
Yeah.
And then go to the coffee shop and throw that one out sometime.
Our modern agricultural techniques are putting as much carbon up as about anything else we do. Fires put up a lot up, of course, cars do, but let's attack the cause, not the effects. Anyway, there's a lot we can talk about.
But Savory's got a talk on there that was really it changed my mind as far as tillage and what we're doing there.
He did it in about 2013, if you Google it, and it really is saying we're pretty good at using all the different tools, fire, technology, and rest. Now we've got to learn how and when to use livestock, so that's where sometimes we're thought of as just grazing and livestock, but it's not. That's just the strong component we're bringing to the table, saying let's figure out how to use that tool right, or when and how. But it's all got to be within this decision-making process that looks at the whole picture, or it doesn't work.
Gabe Brown, I've heard him talk a couple times, but he likes to tell a story or relate that we raise all this corn and we haul it way over there, and then we haul the cattle way over there to feed that corn to them, and then the manure never gets back. Why don't we just do it all right where it's at and just keep moving that way? So.
Yeah. You should have heard Alan and Gabe talking a couple of years ago. The three of us were up there. Yeah. Gabe Brown, Alan Savory, there's some real leaders out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That is just great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.